Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, shall I not seek security for you that it may be well with you? Now, is not Boaz our kinsman, with whose maids you were? Behold, he winnows barley at the threshing floor tonight. Wash yourself, therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your best clothes, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. It shall be, when he lies down, that you shall notice the place where he lies, and you shall go and uncover his feet and lie down. Then he will tell you what you shall do." She said to her, "All that you say, I will do." So she went down to the threshing floor and did according to all that her mother-in-law had commanded her. When Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain, and she came secretly and uncovered his feet and lay down. It happened in the middle of the night that the man was startled and bent forward, and behold, a woman was lying at his feet. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your maid. So spread your covering over your maid, for you are a close relative." Then he said, "May you be blessed of the Lord, my daughter. You have shown your last kindness to be better than the first, by not going after young men, whether poor or rich. Now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you whatever you ask, for all my people in the city know that you are a woman of excellence. Now, it is true, I am a close relative. However, there is a relative closer than I. Remain this night, and when morning comes, if he will redeem you, good. Let him redeem you. But if he does not wish to redeem you, then I will redeem you as the Lord lives. Lie down until morning." So she lay at his feet until morning, and rose before one could recognize another. And he said, Let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. Again he said, "Give me the cloak that is on you, and hold it." So she held it, and he measured 6 measures of barley and laid it on her. Then she went into the city. When she came to her mother-in-law, she said, "How did it go, my daughter?" And she told her all that the man had done for her. She said, "These 6 measures of barley he gave to me, for he said, 'Do not go to your mother-in-law empty-handed.'" Then she said, "Wait, my daughter, until you know how the matter turns out. For the man will not rest until he has settled it today." The word of the Lord. We've moved now from the book of Judges, which we studied through the fall, and now we've come into the book of Ruth for Advent. And in making that move, we go from a book that told the story of the ancient Israelites about 1400 to 1000 BC, a time that was characterized by cruelty and violence and lawlessness, a time that was dominated by wicked men. And then we come to a book that acts as a kind of tender shoot come out of parched ground. And Ruth is not a violent, lawless, wicked story, but Ruth is a love story. Ruth is a redemption story at the same time as the book of Judges. And it is a story that we find in our culture a little strange. Some strange customs in this book, especially pertaining to the rituals of courtship and marriage. Of course, if we were to go into the ancient world and somehow give them a glimpse into our own culture and the way we do courtship today in modern South Florida, if we were to show them, for instance, how people do courtship using a black rectangular handheld device that with the right application can project to you people like items on a menu, and you either embrace or exclude them, whether you slide left or right on the screen, They would think our courtship rituals are more than a little bizarre. So what I'm asking for us to do is reject what one writer has called the arrogance of the modern, and instead put ourselves in that culture and just simply realize sexuality is a very powerful force, and all people, when they try to handle it, have a difficult time. It looks a little bit awkward for everyone. And let's simply acknowledge that the mating rituals of modern South Floridians and the mating rituals of birds and the mating rituals of ancient Israelites are all a little bit weird. I've never met in this congregation anyone who presented himself to me as a white supremacist or a black supremacist, but I have met all of us, and I think all of us have a little bit of modern supremacy in our way of thinking. And so let's reject for today, the arrogance of the modern, and let's get rid of our cultural superiority and not be so culturally judgy for a moment. And let us see if we can find in this passage some of the big themes of life and the big themes of the Bible that connect in this passage and have a kind of transcultural appeal. Because I believe in this passage there is a kind of universal resonance in the way that God has hardwired our brains and our hearts. And I think if we can see outside of our culture for a moment, these universal things that God has put in this passage can incite us, can stir us up, can even enthrall us to think about God and think about a relationship with God in new ways. What some people have called the sacred romance. Let's try to make these connections from this passage. I want to try to show how Eros and Agapé are not as far from one another as you might think. In other words, how erotic love and the love of God are wedded together. They are correspondents to one another. They are analogs to one another. There's something in each that points to the other. And I want to try to show that by making 3 points. Number one, a runaway bride and her matchmaker. Number two, a groom with cold feet, for better or for worse. And number three, why we can't stop singing about love. Let me go over those again. A runaway bride and her matchmaker, a groom with cold feet, for better or for worse, and number three, why we can't stop singing about love. Ruth is the runaway bride in my point. She's a Gentile. She's come far from home, all the way from Moab, and now she is settled with her mother-in-law in Bethlehem. Ruth is a widowed Moabitess, which, like arthritis, we try to avoid. And in fact, the Moabites are the product of a shameful history. The Moabites originated in the shameful incest between Lot and his daughters in Genesis chapter 19 at the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And then there's Naomi, the matchmaker, also a widow. She's from Bethlehem. She is an Israelite, and she has returned from 10 years in Moab, returned with her Gentile daughter-in-law. Naomi, as you might remember, went out of Bethlehem full. Her future golden years were well secured because she had a strong husband and 2 strong sons who could provide for her in her old age. She went out from Bethlehem full, but while in Moab, both her husband and her 2 sons died, and she returned to Bethlehem empty, bereft. Last week we saw that when she came into Bethlehem and people said, is she living up to her name? Her name means pleasant, and many of the young women who knew her in their childhood came to see whether she was living a pleasant life, and she said, don't call me pleasant anymore. Don't call me Naomi. Call me Mara. Call me bitter, because God has dealt bitterly with me. And at the beginning of the chapter, she's bitter. And then by the end of the chapter, she has learned that her foreign daughter-in-law happened on a field owned by a compassionate man, a man who lived in covenant with God, who knew the hesed or covenant faithfulness or kindness of God, and a man who was, of all things, this man Boaz, her relative. And when Naomi heard about this thing that was by happenstance, of course we talked about that last week, Naomi suddenly came to life. And Naomi moves from sadness and lifelessness to being excited and once again taking the initiative. She initiates a plan. She plays the role of matchmaker. She says, "My daughter, shall I not seek security for you, that it may be well for you?" You remember last week, it was Ruth who came to Naomi, the mother-in-law, and said, "Look, I have a plan." And she was so depressed, all she could say was, "Go, daughter." But this time, she's the one with a plan. The word rest, when she says, "Shall I not seek security or rest for you," was also found in chapter 1 when she tried to send her daughters-in-law back to their Moabite mothers. Go back to your mothers, that your mothers might find security for you. And now she's saying, I'll be that mother to you, and I will find rest and security for you. Maybe Naomi is thinking, Ruth already lost her husband. What if she loses her mother-in-law? What if this Moabitess that people try to avoid loses me and finds herself a Gentile in this Jewish town? What might happen to her in the future? And so she poses these two questions rather forcefully. Both are phrased in the negative. Shall I not seek security for you? Is Boaz not our near relative? You know how it goes when we phrase questions like that. How could you not see my car when you backed out of your parking spot? Right? Or how could you not be ready when I came to pick you up? It's a very forceful way of asking a question. And Naomi is being, at this point, assertive and even a little pushy. And the plan that she proposes could really go wrong. We'll talk about that in a moment. She says, get dressed. Don't wear your widow mourning dress anymore. Wear a dress that communicates to people that you are available. And by the way, when you're leaving the house, stop by my dresser. Put on a little perfume. And then she tells Ruth, go to the threshing floor where they process the harvest, where they separate the grain from the chaff. And when the big boss man Boaz comes out, has finished his work, has eaten food, and had a little wine, go up and, like cozy up to him. She says, I'm in. Next paragraph, the middle paragraph that we printed in the bulletin today, is the longest one. It's very artfully and deliberately crafted. It's unfolded, as Hebrew scholars understand, in a particularly deliberate format called a chiasm or chiasm. The rhyme pattern or the rhetorical pattern goes A, B, B, A. And the way it goes is like this. She does symbolic acts, then explains. He explains, then does symbolic acts. You see, A, B, B, A. He's tired, full of food, had some wine, happy because the harvest festival is upon us and his harvest made it through. She goes and gives him cold feet, uncovers his feet and cozies up to him. Then in the middle of the night when it's pitch black, he looks down and he's surprised to see a woman snuggled up to him. And this is the moment of truth where all the readers hold their breath. How will he respond to finding a woman at his feet? He might shame her. It says in the book of Hosea, chapter 9, Israel has played the harlot on every threshing floor. In other words, the threshing floor was a place where harlotry or prostitution took place. And you can imagine why. Men are coming from out of town to do work. There's no accountability from people who know them. They're going to come away with a pocket full of change. And prostitutes found this a fruitful place to do their work. So Boaz might look down and just jump to conclusions and figure this is some prostitute come to solicit me. He might look at her and call her a bad name. He might say, I'm a righteous man, and you disgust me. And you can see how that would be absolutely crushing to Ruth. Or he could have gone the other way. In other words, he could have tried to take advantage of her. Seeing her in that particular role, he could have said, well, evidently she's consenting, she's soliciting this, so sure, it's dark. No one will know. And that would have been awful for Ruth as well. But Boaz doesn't take the moralist route. He doesn't say, hey, you're the kind of girl that my mom warned against. Nor does he take the hedonist route. Nor does he say, sure, we're both consenting adults. Why not? Instead, he queries, who are you? And she responds, it's me, Ruth, your maiden. So, share some of those covers with me. I'm cold. And you're my redeemer. And I want to make it perfectly clear. I intend to be redeemed. In other words, Ruth is proposing marriage. She's putting it right out there. Just like when Missy proposed to me. No. That's not how it really happened. But she's basically saying, look, I know who you are, and I want you to know who I am. You're the one the law provides to marry me, to raise up children for me, to preserve my property rights and the line of Elimelech. And I want you to think of me this way. Is it possible that you might think of me this way, not simply as an employee, not simply as a relative, not simply as a compassion case, but as a wife? I'm making my intentions crystal clear here. And as it turns out, he has apparently thought of her in that way. He's entertained thoughts along these lines. He is attracted to her. In fact, he has looked into her background, and everyone in the town says the same thing, that she is a woman of excellence. He treated her with kindness when he first met her, and now she is responding with kindness. As it were, he imputes kindness to her, and she becomes, in practice, what he kind of declared her to be. And then Boaz makes it like official, where he invokes the name of God. He says, may you be blessed of Yahweh, my daughter. My daughter, signifying that he is perhaps a bit older than her, but not too old, because he's doing the work that young men do of winnowing the barley. And she could have found a younger man or a wealthier man, but she wants him. And she is taking the advice of the matchmaker. And he is responding. And pretty soon, there's going to be wedding bells in Bethlehem. Except, one other little matter needs to be rectified, and that is, there is on the family tree one branch. It's a little closer than he is. It's another relative who is closer, and that relative should by law get first right of refusal. He has to be approached. Of course, Ruth would be sad, but, says Boaz, leave this to me. And Boaz has apparently thought a lot about Ruth. And then, after his explanation, he responds to her symbolic acts with symbolic acts of his own. She uncovered his feet, and he has a couple of symbolic things to do as well. For instance, he tells his workers to keep quiet because, What happens on the threshing floor stays on the threshing floor. And he doesn't want anyone to get the wrong idea about what happened this night. This was an official wedding proposal. And then he does another symbolic act by providing her with a cloak full of grain. Open up your cloak, and he pours in 6 measures of barley. And then when the matchmaker, Naomi, sees this giant sack of grain, she realizes that their plan has worked. Remember, Naomi left Bethlehem 10 years ago full, a husband and 2 sons. But she came back to Bethlehem 10 years later empty. And now Ruth has gone out of Bethlehem empty and returned to Bethlehem with a full sack of grain. And then Naomi assures her daughter, I've been around the block a few more times than you have, Ruth, and I can see what's going on here. This guy has it in for you. This guy has a bad case of love. He's been shot by the arrow of Cupid. And she assures her, wait and see. You'll see by tomorrow, this guy is going to iron out the whole thing with this other relative. And he's going to work it all out. And by the way, daughter-in-law, have you thought about what color the bridesmaids' dresses will be? Because as far as Naomi is concerned, it's like a done deal. Now, I notice a lot of smiles on your faces, and I know it can't be because of my jokes. And I'm just looking around and I'm wondering, why do we like this stuff? You know, it feels like I'm reading Pride and Prejudice. You know, it feels like Boaz is like Mr. Darcy. And I'm just wondering, how many times can we hear this happily after romance story and it still appeals to us, still makes us smile? And I want you ladies to know, the men are smiling too. I can see it from my vantage point. Men and women, young and old. You'd think that people would have had enough of silly love songs. I look around me and I see it isn't so. Oh no. Some people want to fill the world with silly love songs. What's wrong with that? See, the thing is, as some people have observed, the songs throughout our life that we go back to again and again are the love songs that we heard as teenagers and in our young 20s. Because there's something about these silly love songs, something about the union of these two powerful but opposite forces of maleness and femaleness. And there's something about the whole dance that seems to bring these powerful but opposite forces together. Opposite and apparently incompatible, because she sees the world through the lenses of femaleness and he sees the world through the lenses of maleness. And those perspectives seem to have nothing in common. And you married folks know exactly what I'm talking about. Apparently opposite and apparently incompatible, but somehow in the plan of God, mysteriously complementary and suitable. Now, there's a passage in Proverbs that I often read at weddings. You might never have thought about it and how it pertains to male-female relationships, but think of it. Proverbs chapter 30. There are 3 things which are too wonderful for me, 4 which I do not understand. The way of an eagle in the sky, the way of a serpent on a rock, the way of a ship in the middle of the sea. And number 4, the way of a man with a maiden. Now, why is it written that way? Well, the writer is saying in Hebrew poetic style, nature is a mystery. We all tune in to Planet Earth documentaries, and we're all fascinated by the forces of nature. Eagle, how does it stay up there? Snake on a rock. How can a snake get over a rock when the snake doesn't even have any legs? It's a mystery. Ship in the middle of a sea. The wind is coming this way, but somehow by tacking back and forth, the ship is able to go that way. But the way he writes it is, three things are wonderful. But the fourth thing is the thing that really blows me away. And it's this male and female thing. How opposites attract. It's a dance. And you know, the Bible is the story of a romance. It's a story of a sacred romance. That Jesus Christ is the better and perfect Boaz who comes to redeem his bride, the church. He does it by living and obeying in her place. He does it as her near relative. He has to be just like her. He has to be fully human because only a human can live this life that she was required to live but failed to live. And he comes by dying for her crimes. And he comes by slaying the dragon that has always tormented her. He comes putting death to death in his resurrection. Love stories and love songs are whispers of the meaning of the universe. That's the operative line in the whole sermon, by the way. Love stories and love songs are whispers of the meaning of the universe. When people ask you, what's the meaning of life? You can say it's all about a sacred romance. Even in silly little love songs, there's something in that resonates inside of us. It's like the frequency of that vibration. We just instinctively know it and recognize it when we hear it. And you know, if you've read the Bible, that there are a lot of romances in the Bible. Did you know that right at the center of the Bible, there's a very long, exalted love song called the Song of Songs? That's weird, right? That right at the middle of the Bible, you're just reading along about God, about God, about God, about God, and all of a sudden there's a big love song right in the middle of the Bible. You know, the Bible begins with a wedding. And the Bible ends with a wedding. Did you know all of history culminates in a wedding? As Warren Gage has taught this congregation. There's tragedy and there's comedy. A tragedy starts high and ends low and normally ends with a death. A comedy starts low and ends high and normally ends in a wedding. And the Bible follows that particular trajectory. All history is moving in the direction of a wedding. And in male-female relationships and marriage, there exists the possibility of experiencing this sublime, transcendent correspondent, this analog, this symbol, this participation in divine love. Eros and Agapé are really not that far apart. One speaks of the other. That's why St. Paul, who was apparently single, could nonetheless speak of marriage as a mystery. He says this, and what he means by the two becoming one flesh, male and female, this is a great mystery. And I am speaking with reference to Christ and the church. Marriage, a man laying down his life in order to allure his wife in the direction of holiness. And a woman giving up her prerogatives, giving up her rights, and in respect, alluring her wife to win him, or her husband to win him over to God. It's a wonder to the Proverbs writer. It's a mystery that points to Christ and the church, both to Peter and to Paul. And it is somehow the destiny of everyone, male and female, married or single, ancient or modern, everyone who believes in Jesus Christ. We will participate eternally in a love that is so intimate and so powerful that the closest you can get to it in this life is marital love. Heaven and the new creation is an eternal love story. It's a wedding feast that never ends. And in this courtship episode that we're reading and studying today, that we find so strange, there are other tropes, other metaphorical or symbolic storylines that we don't want to miss. For instance, there's the storyline that we find most fascinating, the Cinderella storyline. You find it right here in this passage. Ruth is the Cinderella. She's a Gentile. She's an outsider. She's the despised stepsister. She's not one of God's people. Her people, the Moabites, originated in the shame of incest. So she has that cloud of shame hanging over her as a Moabitess, like arthritis. She's widowed. She's poor, no prospects. She has no rest, no security for her old age. She's bereft, widowed, vulnerable. But, you know that but God thing? But the kindness of God, the hesed, the covenant loyalty of God finds her out, and she becomes included, embraced, important, and as we'll see by the end of the book, she becomes royalty. And this too is the story of every person who comes to believe in the good news of Jesus Christ. If you are a Gentile and looking out on the congregation today, I see that most of you, the vast majority of you, are Gentiles from descent. But in Jesus Christ you are included. You are grafted in to the people of God. And even if you're a Jewish person, in Jesus Christ your sin and shame are atoned. The death of Jesus Christ is the true and final Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. You know that atonement in the Bible simply means covering. And here we see it symbolized as Ruth says to the Redeemer, "Cover me." And he does. See, the truth is, the reason that we all like the Cinderella story is that to one degree or another, we see ourselves as the Cinderella. You know, Cinderella means someone who's covered in cinders. She's called Cinderella because she sweeps out the fireplace. And all of us, I hope, see ourselves as covered with the cinders, with the ashes of sin and guilt. But for everyone who believes, the Redeemer, symbolized in Boaz, in Jesus Christ, the Redeemer of all God's people, we are covered, and our sin and shame and the cinders of our guilt are covered. And then there's another trope, which we might call the Matchmaker story. People who believe in Jesus Christ can see themselves as matchmakers, as Naomi to our neighbors. Look, I've talked to so many people in our congregation and who are Christians over the years, and they find evangelism something tough to engage in. Because I think we tell people, you gotta do this, you gotta do that, but wouldn't it be better if we approached evangelism as an exercise in matchmaking? Wouldn't we be a little bit more apt to do that? If we could approach our friends and neighbors and say, just like Naomi said, wouldn't you like for me to seek security for you? Wouldn't you like me to tell you where I found rest and security? Because, you know, once I trusted in my health, my good deeds, my politics, my youthfulness, my bank account, my career. But then I realized all these sources of security are themselves insecure because you can lose them all. But in this little episode, we have a rare glimpse of the Israelites really living up to the mission that God gave them. They're like the matchmaker people. And you don't find it often in the Old Testament, but in this one particular scene, you really see it. Before the coming of Christ, Israel here is carrying out its mission. A Gentile is drawn to Bethlehem, the house of bread. And there she finds something totally different. She finds not idolatry like she found in her own home, Moab. She finds bread. She finds material provision. But also she finds the true security of God's hesed, God's covenant faithfulness to his people. And she is included. In Abraham, all the nations will be blessed. And you see it taking place in this passage. Now today, the mission of the church is a little bit different from the way it was before the coming of Christ. Before the coming of Christ, everything was like a whirlpool, drawing everyone toward the center, toward the Jewish people, toward their land, toward their city, Jerusalem, toward their temple, and toward the presence of God at the center of the temple, the Ark of the Covenant. In other words, everything was drawing in. But after the coming of Christ, everything is going out. And we get to be matchmakers who go out into the world to tell people the good news of where they can find rest and security. Because the historical person, Jesus of Nazareth, stepped onto the stage of human history and came to live and die and rise again for the sinful and the restless. Those who try desperately to find security and rest in this life, but cannot find it. And if you approach him, Jesus Christ, as Ruth approached Boaz, he promises that he will cover you. He himself said, all that the Father gives to me will come to me, and the one who comes to me, I will certainly not cast out. You know, Ruth must have been anxious as she cozied up to those cold feet. Is he going to reject me? Is he going to send me away? Is he going to be grossed out by my provocative overture? But we don't have to fear that. As we come to the one that Boaz symbolizes, as we come to the final and true Redeemer, we have his open invitation and promise. If you come to me, I will cover you, and I will give you rest and security that can never be taken away. Let's pray together. Father, we ask now as we go into the world tomorrow that you would help us to become pleasant matchmakers, holding out to people around us, fellow Cinderellas, holding out to them a source of rest and security found in Jesus Christ that can never be taken away. Lord, help us to carry out that mission and help us to do it as we're really called to be, messengers who bring good news to a world in need. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.